We're answering some questions that came in through my Instagram and YouTube channels. And the first question is how to communicate fees without sounding money-grabbing hungry to patients. And I would say to that there are two elements. The first element is that you need to make sure that you're convinced that the prices reflect the level of service you offer to your patients. And secondly, if you want to charge more for your services, then you need to ask yourself, what more value and what higher value am I offering to my patients? So am I reducing waiting times? How is the wait room experience? How's the booking experience? Is there a dedicated treatment coordinator who can help patients before booking the appointment and after? If patients need to come back for a review, are they going to be charged? Do you offer warranties on your treatments? So there are many elements. And of course, you can't just get fresh out of uni and charge hundreds of pounds or dollars, 500, 600, 700 for a composite restoration. So you need that experience as well. And what post-grad qualifications do you hold? So all of this creates a package that you can deliver to the patient, and patients will happily pay for a service that is definitely perceived as higher value. So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is, of course, how you communicate your fees to patients, right? Do you have set fees, or do you have fees that are not very transparent to patients? So it's important to take into consideration all these small elements. Like if you look for an answer in our content, we actually do cover many of the pricing considerations. And in my free course, I also tackle the issue of pricing and how do you communicate your prices with patients. The second question is, how did you end up in the UK? It seems like you had a good business in the Netherlands. Yes, I did, actually. We were taking over one practice after the other. We were building a nice dental group. But moving from one practice to two practices to a small dental group and what aspires to be a corporate, you kind of lose touch with your staff, you lose touch with patients, and it becomes more of a numbers game. I clearly, as my colleagues may recall, that part I didn't feel I really enjoyed as much. And I even wanted to leave dentistry because, the way dentistry was organized didn't really give me much satisfaction. It was very profitable, yes, but profitable is not always satisfactory, if you know what I mean. Yes, we were doing a lot of work. We had a dental nursing academy. We were training dental nurses to become therapists as well. And we were very busy, Some days, I would leave the house at 6 a.m. in the morning and I wouldn't come back until midnight. So very busy times, a lot of work, a lot of positive energy, yes, but I didn't feel it, we were going in the right direction. Yeah, a drastic change was really necessary. So yes, successful, but success comes at a cost. And I now realize you don't have to do the long hours to earn triple of what I used to make. Actually, 4 or 5 times more than what I used to make back in Holland while owning 8 practices. The next question is, how do I explain treatment options to patients in a way that they actually understand without overwhelming them? What I think is important to understand is, where is the patient in the journey of understanding the need for treatment? Because if we start communicating with patients immediately that they need 4 fillings without explaining what the 4 fillings actually going to solve, then the problem really will be that patients may say yes to you just because they trust you. But if they encounter any problems with those fillings, they will come back to you and say, you didn't treat me well. I think the right approach to this is that you take a step back. You've identified a few problems relating to oral health. So for example, periodontal disease, endodontic disease. You may have seen a few cavities, a few fillings that have cracks or leakage. And from these problems, you want to move on to offering solutions. Now, the first step is to communicate the fact that you found those problems. And the best way I found to bring across the urgency of treatment is by using visuals. So for example, how do you visualize periodontal disease? So the first step is take a picture of your periodontal probe with your intraoral camera, just outside the mouth, and take a picture of that same probe going into a healthy gingival space sulcus. So probe 1 to 3 millimeters, that's healthy. Then probe the 6 to 7 millimeter pocket and take a picture of that as well. Then put the patient up and explain to them, show them on the screen the difference between the 1 millimeter pocket and the 6-7 millimeter pocket. And you can use them from the internet. Google Images has many infographics that can assist you in that. You can use one of these infographics to show that a pocket is an indication of disease. Now, disease is a concept that may feel far away from a patient. So how do we bring that closer to a patient? Well, you have to make it relevant to the patient. In their case, for example, if you talk about periodontal disease, you can say, well, there is loss of attachment. Well, what does that mean, loss of attachment? Well, you're losing bone. Oh God, where am I losing bone? Well, you're losing jawbone. Your tooth actually has limited amounts of bone surrounding it. And at the moment, your body is removing bone in response to a threat. And that threat is bacterial activity, germs, living on the root surface. Now, many patients will tell you, oh my God, I'm not in pain. You can say, well, this won't cause any pain until the infection or the inflammation goes really far into the root and reaches the nerve, so the apical foramen, in which case the tooth will be lost or will have a very poor prognosis. So we clearly want to stop this progression of bone loss. One thing that I found very useful is to explain to patients that all the bone that is lost, I can't bring back up anymore, right? Maybe a periodontist can do some grafting, yes, in some cases. But from a general dentist's perspective, there's very limited treatment that you can do apart from, of course, the root surface debridement under local anesthetic and really managing these pockets and allowing them to heal nicely. But you can't get bone back up. So it's important to have that discussion with your patient. And this is a discussion that you have with your patient on the side of when you want to talk about periodontal disease. If you want to talk about, let's say the patient had a lower left first molar extracted 10 years ago, and they don't feel there's a problem, but you're seeing tilting mesial angulation of the lower 7. And as a result, the occlusal stability isn't great anymore. So one thing I would say to the patient is I would use articulating paper, I would take pictures, and I would show them, again, images on Google. And I would tell them, look, your lower molar is tilting. We can see that on x-rays. We can see it on the occlusal pattern, right? Always use visuals, and that will help patients understand the urgency of treatment. It's not about trying to sell your patients treatments they don't need. It's about trying to help your patients reach an acceptable level of oral health, both short and long term. So we need to get away from the notion that, if I explain to patients all these problems, that they may be overwhelmed. Well, you can take it in steps, right? We all learned, the step 0 is the emergencies, right? You have to help your patient get rid of pain, any life-threatening situation, any trauma. Step 1, disease control, where you treat infections, you treat cavities, you reach healthy bone and healthy gum. And then the more definitive restorative phase, that's where you start planning long-term. And you can get into alignment, orthodontics, or prosthodontics. You can start closing gaps with implants, bridge work, and you can strengthen teeth, again, with crowns or onlays. So I hope that answers the question that my colleague here asked. So this question is quite interesting. I struggle with difficult or aggressive patients. How do I stay calm and professional when someone is being unreasonable? Well, again, we have to ask ourselves, what does difficult mean? If I label a patient difficult, immediately in my mind, this patient is marked as or labeled as unreasonable. If I were to ask the patient, are you being unreasonable? What do you think they'll say? They'll say, I'm perfectly reasonable. So the judgment of a patient being unreasonable is only my judgment. It's from my perspective they're being unreasonable. Well, the patient has a different opinion, and the patient has a different experience. And the way the patient behaves is very much informed by the way I behave towards them, the way the situation presents itself to them, and their previous experiences with dentists, right? And this is a part you and I have no idea about. Maybe this patient was traumatized. This patient was sold so many treatments that they didn't feel they needed. Well, maybe they needed it, but they didn't feel that they needed those treatments. How many times we get patients in the chair telling us, my previous dentist did work that I didn't need, right? We hear it all the time. And yet, how many times have you done work that the patient didn't need? You'll say zero. If you ask me, I never in my life did, intentionally at least, I never did a single piece of work without the patient needing it, without the patient having a benefit of having that treatment. Because in the end, we're doctors. We're trying to increase the oral health of patients. We're trying to improve the oral health of patients. So back to the question about difficult and aggressive patients and patients who are unreasonable and how to stay calm. Well, one thing is, of course, you need to disconnect the fact that the patient is disgruntled about something from yourself and your professional dental obligation to provide the patient with the best level of care. So if you're thinking, well, I need this patient to behave in a certain way and they're behaving in a different way, then of course you'll label them as difficult. But what if you drop the idea that the patient should behave in a certain way? What if you just keep the options open and get patients to behave in the way they see fit? And patients are human. They have feelings and experiences and traumas and a lot of anxiety. If you are faced with that anxiety, you behave in a different way than when you're sitting at home, on the couch watching TV. So I think we have to reconsider labeling patients as difficult, right? Because in my career, I may have encountered up to maybe 4 or 5 patients who were unreasonable to such an extent that I couldn't anymore, right? And I really tried my best, but there was just no way that they could understand that I have no bad intent. There is no intention of selling you a treatment or prescribing a treatment that you don't need. You, in fact, do have these cavities, right? And I showed you, but you don't want to see them. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. So if you talk about difficult or aggressive, well, patients have the right to ignore what you say to them. They have the right to decline treatment, but they don't have the right to shout and swear and, insult you, because that's where the line must be drawn. So any abusive behavior, verbal, physical, should be stopped. And that's not just, by the way, aimed at you being the dentist, but also a member of your team. Any person being subjected to abuse should be protected in your dental practice. I think that's very clear. The law is very clear about this as well. Okay, but we will be discussing this in more detail in future videos as well. How do you deal with the constant pressure of running behind schedule and feeling rushed? This is a matter that relates to managing your time. And the CanMeds model has a beautiful set of requirements doctors need to meet. And one of the requirements is that you need to be a manager. So you need to be manager of time. You need to manage your finances. And it's not easy, but running behind schedule is and can be frustrating. It's not that, that I can tell you that I never ran behind schedule. Actually, many times I have been running behind schedule, but it's about realizing that this is part of your job. You're not treating machines that, if the time is up, you can put the machine aside and you can come back to it later. Patients present a small mouth. They present with a gag reflex. They present with, you're trying to place the rubber dam and the rubber dam clamp doesn't fit. So you have to try different rubber dam clamps. They present with a cavity so deep that requires much longer to excavate. And, you may do a crown prep and you want to take the impression and the first 3 fail. So all that delays your treatment. And I think there has to be an interaction between you within the, dental clinical environment and reception who can manage the patient's waiting. And in one of our videos, I mentioned what can be done to manage the patient who is waiting. There's a separate section that covers that. But the patient who is actually in the chair will appreciate all the time and effort that you put in to deliver high quality work. So I don't think the issue is that the patient in the chair will mind. It's the patient waiting and the internal pressure that we put on ourselves. And I think you have to ask yourself, how do I solve this issue with frustrations, right? First of all, how do I solve the issue of patients waiting? right? And how they perceive waiting. Watch that video. There are some great tips in there on how to manage waiting times for patients and how to deal with patients waiting. And then, of course, there is the internal element of how I perceive running late. Of course, if I see that every crown prep I run 20 minutes late, clearly I'm under scheduling. So if I book an hour, then maybe I should book an hour and a half. So you need to improve these processes, and you need to always look at your systems and look back and say, well, how many times did I run late and where am I running late? And you'll find a certain pattern, right? Maybe you're a very chatty type and you'll run late with your new patient consultations. Well, if you're booking them half an hour, maybe start booking them an hour. And I know it'll eat into your effective hourly rate. I understand that. But you need to make that decision. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a high effective hourly rate and keep chatting with patients about things that may be unrelated to dentistry and not wanting to run late while just booking them for half an hour, frustrating the next patient. So you need to find a solution yourself. You can't just accept that you constantly run late. And after 10 years of running late and patients, complaining, that you'll feel somehow happier in your dental profession and in your dental career. It just won't happen, right? So you need to solve this problem. And there are many aspects in dentistry that need to be solved. And this touches also on the element of how can I earn more, right? A few dentists actually asked me, how can I triple my income? It's not a silver bullet. There are so many different aspects that you need to improve before you can reach 50K, 60K a month levels. So, and we're talking about, changing your treatment mix, looking at your pricing, contract negotiations, case acceptance rates, communication style, and all these aspects and many more will inform and will start shaping the way you practice dentistry. And all these small gains will actually help you become a better dentist, a more fulfilled dentist, and a dentist who at least gets better reward for their hours spent treating patients. What are the early warning signs of burnout that I should watch out for before it gets too bad? Well, one of the biggest red flags for burnout is if you start dreading Mondays. If you don't enjoy going back to work, that's a big red flag, right? You should ask yourself, what am I doing? If I'm dreading Mondays, then clearly I'm not finding joy. I'm not finding fulfillment in my everyday work. And there are many reasons, right? It could be your colleagues, it could be a toxic work environment, it could be the internal pressure you put on yourself. It could also be high cost lifestyle, right? Maybe you like going to 5-star resorts 6 times a year, and that costs a fortune. And you need to fund your lifestyle. And maybe you want to drive a Lamborghini. So all of these aspects play a role in why you feel that pressure to still show up on Monday morning, despite that you actually don't like going to work. Others might find that they're just trapped in a system that forces them to work in a certain way. And I can tell you that simply, you're not trapped. You may feel you're trapped, but you've made a very clear decision to choose this path of staying exactly where you are. And that's a decision that you make every single day. So you show up at the dental practice where you work and you do an 8-hour shift. That 8-hour shift you could have done somewhere else. You could have done under different conditions. So for example, let's take 2 dentists. One dentist works in the NHS and does 80% NHS work. The other dentist works purely private. The first dentist sees 40 patients every day. The amount of time spent per patient is very limited, and they feel they have to chase UDAs every day, and they don't feel that there is much joy in that. And this is just an example, right? You may actually work in the NHS and you may find absolutely great joy in that. I'm just giving an example of a dentist who is not finding joy working in the NHS, treating 40 patients. And that dentist may actually even get more complaints due to the nature of their work, right? Due to the pressures of the work. They can't dedicate a lot of time for every patient that they see. The other dentist is seeing 5, 6, 7 patients a day. Each treatment takes longer, and they're making double of what this NHS dentist is making. They both live in the same city. They both decided to go do dentistry, but they practice dentistry differently. So the way you practice dentistry is really your own decision. And I think many dentists may feel trapped, but need to rethink their mindset. Why am I actually in this profession in the very first place? Do I like dentistry? And if the answer is yes, why is it that I do not look forward to Mondays? And of course, I can blame all the external factors, but there is also an internal factor that you need to reflect on. So next question says, I'm earning decent money, but still feel financially stressed. How do I improve my relationship with money? Now, money has two elements again. There's an element that comes in and there's an element that goes out. And one of the top US universities, I believe it was Stanford University, did a study on about more than 4,000 individuals. And the first question they asked them is, rate 1 to 10 your levels of happiness. And of course, you had people rate 2, others rate 8, others 6, or maybe 5, right? The full range. And the second question was, what is your annual income? And you had people at 20,000 a year, you had people at 100,000 a year, and there was even one person at 4 billion a year. And the third question was, what would your income need to increase by to reach 10 out of 10 happiness? And by far, the majority or the consensus among the group of over 4,000 individuals said, in order for my satisfaction or my happiness to increase all the way to a 10 out of 10, I need double the money. So the person who was earning 20,000 asked for another 20,000. The person who is earning 100,000 wanted 200,000. And the person who is earning 4 billion, yes, wanted another 4 billion. So what does that say? Money is never going to give you happiness. We all think that chasing money will somehow inject us with more happiness in life. What money does, it facilitates life. It makes life a bit easier to live, and maybe you will have more financial freedom. But you will never get financial freedom if everything you get, you immediately spend. So if I get 10K a month, I can easily spend the 10K. If I get 50K a month, I can create my own financial misery by spending immediately the full 50K on life. So about earning decent money, yes, many dentists actually earn decent money, right? Even if you are 8K a month, right? That's way above the average. The problem lies in lifestyle creep. We increase our spending. Dentists are notorious, right? We start living a life way above our means. So we have to ask ourselves, is this the life I want to lead? And if you decide to spend every little penny that you earn, that's on you. You're the maker of that decision and you will create your own financial misery. My recommendation to dentists is don't go into debt. Of course, many in the US have student debt that they need to repay. In the UK, same thing, many European countries as well. So you already have high levels of debt. If you start taking on a car loan, a loan to go on holiday, you want to buy furniture and you take that on a loan, before you know it, you spend double the money on interest. So my recommendation to dentists is take it slowly. Don't spend all your money, right? You earn 10K a month, try to put aside 2K a month, right? 20% of what you earn should go into savings or into investing. And there are many platforms where you can invest in investment funds, right? That do give a return anything between 7 and 11% on an annual basis. So that's it for today. If you have any other questions, DM me or put it out in the comments.